Good morning, folks. John Adamson, the Readmin Documentation Guru. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be recapping an article that was published on fsbpt.org, and this article is about 10 ways that can cause you, or easy ways to lose your license. 10 easy ways to lose your license. And the first is sexual misconduct. And one of the things that ethical practice standards generally talk about is, one, the relationship between the therapist and the patient, and making sure that's always on the up and up and there's never any sexual interaction there. Even hints at sexual interaction should be kept away from our patient treatment. Number two is substance abuse. I know in the PT ethics guidelines, it states very clearly that a therapist has an obligation to the patient to not be practicing when they're under the influence, whether it's drugs or alcohol. So alcoholic abuse or drug abuse is one way that you can lose your license. Professional discipline like criminal convictions or unethical conduct. My job requires us to report if we've had some kind of legal issue, even down to getting a ticket. I got a ticket not too long ago, and I had to let my boss know and then report that to my HR, because they might make a determination that if I get too many traffic violations, I'm not representing them well and I'm putting them at risk. It's a liability issue. So we want to make sure that everything we do is legal. And you might be doing the most legal things in your therapist practice, but if you're doing unethical, illegal things outside of that, well, frankly, illegality tends to spill over into all areas of life. So if you can't be trusted in other areas of your life, how can you be trusted with ethical and legal patient care? Fraud and misrepresentation. We have an obligation to make sure that we are to the letter on the time we're putting in for our patients, on billing properly for those patients. And it's not enough to say, well, I did not know what I was doing was illegal. You have a responsibility to know that. I unfortunately have been involved when I was in an area management position in 2 firings over this very issue, misrepresentation of billing. Patient abuse. We have to be careful that whatever we do is taking care of the patient without potentially harming them. First, do no harm. And if your negligent practice causes harm of a patient, and sometimes harm is unavoidable, sometimes we are involved with a patient, they get harmed while we're treating them, and frankly, there wasn't anything we could have done about it. I had a patient with a pathological fracture just from weight bearing during a transfer. Couldn't have seen that coming. I still felt like crap, and I was just thinking about it a little bit ago, thinking, what could I have done? This happened years ago. But we do have to make sure that whatever we do, we're taking precautions to make sure that something bad doesn't happen. Medication violations. You have to be careful about your scope of practice. In home health, for example, we therapists are sometimes in the home and we're doing like medication reconciliation, and we're supposed to be doing some basic education on stuff, but it's generally not considered our scope of practice. One of the biggest things we can't do is recommend a new medicine, because that new medicine might have side effects or compound issues with other drugs the patient's on, and we just frankly don't have the training. Even if you've got a doctorate, your pharmacology class is nowhere near qualifying you to handle that kind of stuff. Unethical behavior. And so you'd really need to know your ethics standards, APTA, AOTA, and ASHA, and just make sure you follow those standards, because a lot of states recognize those standards, and so we've got to make sure we're following them. Poor documentation or record keeping. And if you look at the lists of therapists that have lost their license in different states, a lot of them lose it over documentation issues. They either underdocumented, they documented on patients they didn't give care to, their documentation was illegible, and this was a pattern. Their documentation was consistently not timely, and lack of timeliness usually leads to, even if you don't intend to documenting false things. So we want to make sure that we're doing good documentation practice. Unlicensed practice. Well, if you're not licensed, you don't have a license, so you can't lose your license. So that's kind of a, doesn't need to be on that list. And then boundary violations. And this is for therapists that practice in more than one state. Some therapists have been caught letting their license lapse in one state because it borders them, and they just periodically go into the other state to cover, let's say, an occasional day or visit, and they don't think about keeping up their license in that state. Now, we may move towards a nationalization at some point of our license, which would be wonderful, because every state really should have the same practice act if we are United States therapists, and we are governed by national coverage determinations and nationally recognized entities like APTA, AOTA, and ASHA. But for the time being, if you got more than one license, make sure you're following carefully all the regulatory compliance issues of those states, because states differ and we need to be up on what the requirements are. Anyway, John Adamson, the Rehab and Documentation Guru. According to the FSBPT, those are the 10 ways you can lose your license. I hope you have a great day. Take care, and God bless.